Fear Switch, The Heart of Callie Kai by Elton Thomas, Chapters 1 through 6. Chapter 1. Dreams of What Was, Max's Awakening. Max Reeves was flying down the soccer field, his cleats barely brushing the grass as he moved with effortless precision. The crowd's roar surrounded him, a thrilling hum that surged through his body. The world around him was a vivid haze of greens and blues, the rolling pitch, the cloud-dappled sky, and the far-off cheering faces. All that mattered was the ball at his feet, and the way he could feel the pulse of the game in his very bones. The crisp scent of grass mixed with the slight, earthy hint of damp soil, grounding him in the present. With a swift flick of his right foot, Max scooped the ball into the air, spinning it off his knee and launching it just high enough to catch it with the top of his head. The touch was light but purposeful, controlled with the perfect balance of force and finesse. A soft, confident smile played on his face as he tapped it from one foot to the other, each touch as natural as breathing. This was his art, a personal ballet played out on grass, where every move was an expression of joy, confidence, and pure, unrestrained freedom. He caught sight of a defender approaching, charging toward him with determination etched into his face. Max knew this move by heart. With a sharp pivot, he leaned to the left, feinting just enough to make the defender commit. In an instant, Max shifted his weight to his right foot, effortlessly slipping past the outstretched leg of his opponent. The movement was fluid, a perfect arc of his body, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. A thrill ran through him, the same thrill that had captivated him from his very first game. Now the goalpost loomed ahead, a vision of victory. He focused, his body winding up for the final shot, each muscle primed and ready. As his leg drew back, he could feel the weight of his entire being coiled in that single movement, the culmination of every practice, every sacrifice, every inch he'd gained to get here. This was his moment. This was who he was. Then he heard a shout from the stands, a familiar voice piercing through the noise and the rush. It was his mother's voice. He turned, distracted, and in that instant, the ball slipped from his focus. His eyes widened as he tried to recenter himself, feeling the precarious shift, the tilt of something slipping away, as if a thread holding him aloft had suddenly snapped. The ball dropped to the ground, and the cheering faded, replaced by a profound silence that pressed down on him like a weight. Max woke with a gasp, his chest tight as if he'd been running, the remnants of that exhilarating dream slipping away like water through his fingers. The pale light of dawn filtered through his window, casting soft shadows across his room. He blinked, taking in the familiar walls, the small desk cluttered with textbooks and stray notes, the posters of his favorite soccer players now faded and curling at the edges. The ache in his heart was sharp, immediate, and painfully real. He took a slow breath, exhaling as he tried to ground himself in reality. Lying still, he stared at the ceiling, the thrill of the game still lingering in his veins, mingling with a hollow sadness that weighed on him like a stone. His hand drifted toward his left leg, brushing against the smooth surface of his prosthetic. The stark reminder of his limitations gnawed at him, a daily reality that he couldn't escape, not even in his dreams. Sighing, he pulled himself upright, propping his hands on either side of his bed, his shoulders slumped in quiet resignation. The muscles in his arms and back tensed as he steadied himself, drawing in a breath that shook slightly as he exhaled. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Birds chirped in the trees, and the faint rumble of a passing car echoed down the quiet street. But in his room, there was only stillness, the weight of his thoughts hanging thick and unmoving. Max let his gaze drift to the small soccer ball nestled in the corner of his room, dust gathering along its seams. It used to be a prized possession, a daily companion. Now it felt like a reminder of something lost, a symbol of dreams that felt out of reach. There was a time when he could juggle it effortlessly, each touch a testament to the countless hours he'd spent honing his skills. He clenched his jaw, feeling a flicker of anger rise in his chest, a resentment that he usually tried to bury deep. His hands balled into fists as he remembered the field, the feeling of grass beneath his cleats, the exhilaration of outmaneuvering an opponent, the thrill of scoring a goal. It had been his world, his passion, and his identity. Now it felt like a distant memory, something he could touch only in dreams, slipping further away every time he reached out for it. He released a shaky breath, his expression hardening with a mix of sadness and frustration. Every movement he made was a careful balance of strength and limitation, each step a reminder of what he'd lost. But there was still something there, something that drove him to sit on the edge of his bed and start the day, even when it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. Max shifted, reaching down to adjust the prosthetic attached to his left leg, checking the fit with a quiet precision. He had learned to adapt, to compensate, to accept the reality that this was his life now. But no amount of acceptance could fill the void left by the loss of his old self, the part of him that had soared on the field, free and unstoppable. As he fastened the straps, he couldn't help but recall the moment that had changed everything. The park, the police, his father. Images flickered through his mind, fragments of a day that had torn his world apart. It was a wound that had never truly healed, a memory that haunted him like a shadow, lurking at the edges of his consciousness. Standing up, he caught his reflection in the mirror by his closet. His face was set in a quiet determination, his dark eyes holding a depth of sadness that he rarely allowed others to see. He straightened, shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, as if daring the world to see him for who he was, a fighter, someone who had endured more than most, yet still carried on. But beneath the surface, there was a vulnerability, a fear that he would never be whole again. A sudden knock at his door broke the silence, and his mother's voice called out, gentle yet tinged with concern. "Max? Are you up, sweetheart?" He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the lingering remnants of his dream. "Yeah, Mom. I'm up." "Breakfast is ready," she replied, her voice warm and soothing, the kind of comfort he'd come to rely on, even when he didn't want to admit it. "Okay, I'll be down in a minute," he answered, forcing a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As he turned toward the door, he cast one last glance at the soccer ball in the corner, feeling a pang of longing that he couldn't quite suppress. It was a part of him that still yearned to be whole, to feel that rush of freedom once more, if only for a fleeting moment. But as he left his room, he pushed the feeling aside, burying it beneath the layers of resilience he had built over time. This was his life now, a different kind of battle, one that required a strength he was still learning to find within himself. And with each step, he reminded himself that he was moving forward, one day at a time, even if the journey was far from easy. In the quiet moments that followed, as he made his way downstairs, Max felt a quiet resolve settle over him, a promise to himself that, despite everything, he would keep moving. He would find a way to redefine what strength meant, even if he had to learn it all over again. Chapter 2. Discovering Kali Kai, A Path to Strength. The neighborhood was quiet as Lori Reeves carefully pulled her car up to the unassuming building on the corner of Elm and Fifth. The small, neatly kept structure was nondescript, almost easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. It was unlike other gyms and martial arts centers in the city. It lacked the bold signage or flashy decorations. Instead, the single metal door bore a simple sign that read, Kali Kai Dojo. Lori glanced over at her son in the passenger seat. Max sat stiffly, his gaze fixed on the building. His expression was guarded, almost unreadable, but Lori knew him well enough to recognize the anxiety flickering behind his dark eyes. She reached out, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You ready?" she asked softly. Max didn't respond right away, his eyes lingering on the dojo. He took a breath and nodded, his jaw tightening. He'd agreed to come, albeit reluctantly, but Lori could sense the uncertainty rolling off him in waves. "This might be good for you, Max," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just keep an open mind." "I know, Mom," he replied, his tone neutral, almost mechanical. He kept his gaze forward, studying the building as though he were trying to see beyond its walls. They both got out of the car, Max carefully adjusting his stance as he stepped onto the pavement, a motion that had become second nature since the accident. Lori watched him, her heart aching at the quiet resilience he carried, a strength born out of necessity. She wanted to give him something more, something that didn't just teach him to survive, but allowed him to feel whole again. They entered the building, greeted by a quiet stillness and the faint, calming scent of sandalwood. The dojo was a long, open room, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected the polished wooden floor. Soft light streamed in from the high windows, casting a gentle glow over the space. Wooden beams ran along the ceiling, adding a rustic warmth to the dojo that contrasted with the stark, cold designs of other gyms they'd visited in the past. At the far end of the room stood a man, Andrew Sanoda, the owner and lead instructor. He was tall and lean, his frame wiry but powerful, with a calm presence that radiated across the room. His black hair was tied back neatly, and his face held a quiet serenity that seemed both inviting and enigmatic. He moved with an effortless grace, each motion deliberate and controlled, as if he were entirely aware of every muscle, every breath. Andrew looked up as they approached, offering them a welcoming smile that softened the edges of his otherwise intense gaze. There was a warmth in his expression, but also a focused attentiveness that made Lori feel as though he saw right through her polite demeanor to the concern and hope hidden beneath. "You must be Max," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. He extended a hand to Max, who hesitated before taking it. "Yeah," Max replied, his voice barely above a murmur. His grip was firm but cautious, and he quickly withdrew his hand, folding his arms across his chest. "And you're Lori?" Andrew turned to her, his tone respectful yet friendly. Lori nodded, offering a small smile. "Thank you for having us. I wasn't sure if this would be the right fit." Andrew nodded knowingly, his gaze drifting between Lori and Max. "Kali Kai isn't like other martial arts," he began, his voice steady, almost meditative. "We focus on empowerment through movement, on finding balance, strength, and control from within. It's not about fighting or winning. It's about connecting with yourself on a deeper level." Max shifted, his arms tightening around his torso, his posture defensive. "So, there's no sparring? No fighting?" he asked, his tone skeptical. Andrew's expression softened. "No fighting," he confirmed. "Kali Kai is derived from an ancient martial art, but I've adapted it to remove violence entirely. Here we learn techniques for movement, for precision, for building a sense of peace within ourselves. Fighting isn't the goal. Mastery over oneself is." Max's brow furrowed, and Lori could see the hint of disappointment in his face. She reached out, resting a reassuring hand on his arm. "Just give it a try," she murmured, her voice gentle. With a sigh, Max nodded, albeit reluctantly. Andrew led them toward the center of the room, where a set of thin, polished sticks lay arranged on a mat. Each stick was about 2 feet long, made of smooth wood with a natural grain that glinted under the light. They were simple, but elegant, each one crafted with care. "These are Kali sticks," Andrew explained, picking up a pair and twirling them lightly in his hands. His movements were graceful, almost like a dance, the sticks moving in a fluid pattern that seemed to defy gravity. "They're used to help with coordination, strength, and focus. In Kali Kai, we use these to practice precise movements and controlled breathing. Think of them as an extension of your own body. Max watched, a faint spark of curiosity flickering in his eyes. He reached out, taking the sticks from Andrew, holding them gingerly as though they were delicate. The weight was light, but he could feel the balance, the solidness of the wood beneath his fingertips. Andrew smiled, nodding encouragingly. "Try this," he said, demonstrating a basic grip, holding the sticks at the hilt. He guided Max through a few simple movements, showing him how to flick his wrists to create a fluttering motion with the sticks. The movements were subtle, requiring precision and control rather than brute strength. Max tried to mimic Andrew's actions, his movements stiff and unsure at first. His expression was one of deep concentration, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the flow of the sticks. With each attempt, he began to relax, finding a rhythm, however small, in the motions. "You're doing well," Andrew said, his tone genuinely encouraging. "It's not about speed or power, it's about control, about feeling the connection between your mind and your body. Once you master that, you can find strength in every movement." Max looked up, his expression softened with a mix of interest and doubt. "But, without fighting, what's the point?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if he were afraid to voice his skepticism. Andrew paused, considering his response carefully. "There's a kind of strength that comes from knowing you have the ability to fight, but choosing not to," he replied, his gaze steady. "Kali Kai isn't about overpowering others. It's about mastering yourself, your fears, your limitations, your anger. When you can control those things, you have a power that can't be taken away." Max stared at him, his expression thoughtful, as though he were trying to understand a foreign concept. He looked down at the sticks in his hands, feeling the smooth wood, the weight of potential they held. For the first time in a long time, he felt a small glimmer of possibility, a sense that maybe there was a different path forward. Andrew guided him through a few more movements, each one emphasizing fluidity and balance. Max's movements became smoother, more natural, and Laurie watched as a small, tentative smile began to form on his face. It was a subtle change, but she could see the tension in his shoulders easing, the weight he carried lifting, if only slightly. "Now, let's try something a bit more advanced," Andrew said, stepping back and giving Max space. He demonstrated a series of intricate moves, twirling the sticks in a pattern that created a mesmerizing flow, like the gentle flapping of bird wings. He called it flutters, a technique that required control and grace, each movement flowing into the next without pause. Max's eyes widened, his expression a mix of awe and apprehension. He tried to replicate the movements, his hands faltering as he attempted the rhythm. Andrew offered gentle corrections, guiding him patiently, helping him find his own pace. Slowly, Max began to catch on, his movements becoming more fluid, more controlled. By the time they finished, a faint sheen of sweat dotted Max's forehead, but his face held a lightness that Laurie hadn't seen in a long time. His breathing was steady, and for the first time since they'd arrived, he looked content. Andrew gave him an approving nod. "You did well, Max. There's a lot of potential in you. Kali Kai can help you find it." Max didn't respond immediately, his gaze drifting down to the sticks in his hands. He nodded, a small, thoughtful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a declaration of commitment, but it was a beginning, a step forward. Laurie watched, a mixture of relief and gratitude welling up inside her. She met Andrew's gaze, her eyes conveying a silent thank you. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the unspoken words with a warm smile. As they left the dojo, Max walked with a new, quiet confidence, his steps steady and purposeful. Laurie stayed a few paces behind, allowing him the space to process, to hold on to the sense of empowerment he had found, however small. She knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, her son was beginning to find his way back to himself. Chapter 3. Building Foundations, Balance and Control. The dojo was quiet in the early morning, the soft golden light streaming in through the high windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Outside, the world was beginning to stir, but inside, the students of Kali Kai stood in a focused line, their gazes trained on Andrew Sanoda as he paced in front of them. Today, Andrew would be teaching them the first essential lesson of Kali Kai: balance and control. Max stood at the far end of the line, feeling both excitement and trepidation hum beneath his skin. He hadn't known what to expect when he first arrived, but something about the calm and almost reverent energy of the dojo had settled him, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He glanced down at the Kali sticks in his hands, the smooth wood cool against his palms. They were light yet solid, balanced with a weight that felt purposeful. "Today," Andrew began, his voice calm but carrying across the room with quiet authority, "we're going to work on building foundations. Kali Kai isn't just about movement. It's about control, restraint, and most importantly, balance." He held up a pair of Kali sticks, the polished wood glinting faintly in the light. "These sticks are extensions of you. The way you move them reflects the way you control your mind and body. Remember that." He moved to the front of the line, his posture upright, shoulders relaxed, his presence radiating a quiet confidence that seemed to draw everyone's attention. He raised one stick and then the other, positioning them with precision. In Kali Kai, balance doesn't just mean keeping steady on your feet. It means finding harmony within yourself, learning to connect your mind, your body, and your breath into a single controlled flow. Once you find that balance, every movement becomes an expression of strength and calm. He demonstrated a series of movements, flicking the sticks in smooth arcs, creating a light, rhythmic sound as they cut through the air. His wrists flicked up and down, the sticks twirling in fluid patterns that seemed almost effortless. He called these flutters, a technique that required grace and control, each movement connected in a seamless flow. The sticks moved in his hands like an extension of his arms, and the students watched in silent awe as Andrew demonstrated. Max's eyes followed every motion, captivated by the elegance of it. The movements were precise but gentle, strong yet restrained. There was a beauty in the simplicity, a harmony that resonated deep within him. He tightened his grip on his own sticks, his pulse quickening with anticipation. Andrew glanced over at the line of students, his gaze sharp but encouraging. "All right, your turn. Start by holding your sticks at the hilt. This is where you'll find the best balance." He gestured for them to raise their sticks, and Max mimicked the motion, feeling the weight settle in his hands. "Now, let's try a basic flutter," Andrew instructed, his tone calm and even. "This is about control, so don't rush. Focus on your wrist movement. Let your hand guide the stick, not force it." Max raised his wrists, attempting to replicate the motion he'd just seen. His movements were hesitant at first, a little stiff, but he focused on Andrew's guidance, trying to relax his grip, to let the stick flow naturally. He could feel the unfamiliarity in his muscles, the resistance of his own body. But he pushed through, determined to get it right. Around him, the other students were also experimenting with their movements, some catching on quickly, others struggling with the coordination. Max glanced to his left and saw a young woman, her expression intense, brows furrowed in concentration as she tried to find her rhythm. To his right, an older man was moving with more ease, his sticks gliding in controlled arcs, a small smile of satisfaction on his face. Andrew moved among them, offering gentle corrections, adjusting grips, nodding encouragements. "Good. Soften your wrist here. Let the stick do the work. Yes, that's it. Keep it fluid." His voice was calm, never rushed, and he watched each student with a focus that felt personal, as if he could see each of their individual struggles and triumphs. When he reached Max, he paused, watching as Max attempted the flutter. Max's movements were still choppy, the sticks resisting his efforts to guide them in smooth arcs. He glanced up, meeting Andrew's gaze, feeling a mix of frustration and embarrassment. "You're trying to force it," Andrew said gently. "Relax your grip. Don't hold it so tightly. Let the stick find its own balance." Max exhaled, nodding, loosening his grip slightly. He lifted his arms again, letting his wrists guide the movement instead of his entire arm. This time the stick flowed more easily, gliding in a smoother, more controlled arc. A small spark of satisfaction flared within him, and he felt a smile tug at the corners of his mouth. "That's better," Andrew said, nodding in approval. "You see, it's not about strength, it's about trust. Trust in the balance of the stick, and trust in yourself. Balance comes from within." Max held on to those words, letting them sink in as he continued to practice, focusing on the rhythm, on the subtle shift of his wrist, on the quiet connection between his body and the movement. Slowly, the flutter began to feel more natural, each arc a little smoother than the last. "Now," Andrew said, stepping back, "let's try adding a flap." He demonstrated, holding one stick steady while flicking the other in a sharp, controlled movement, creating a small, precise swing. A flap is a short, quick motion. It's like a single beat, a small moment of intensity within the flow. When you combine a flutter with a flap, it creates a dynamic balance, a rhythm of calm and strength. He moved his sticks in a series of coordinated flutters and flaps, the movements weaving together in a mesmerizing pattern. The precision was breathtaking, each motion purposeful and perfectly balanced. The students watched, their gazes intent, captivated by the beauty of the technique. Andrew nodded at them, signaling for them to try. Max took a deep breath, focusing on the memory of Andrew's movements. He tried to replicate the motion, his hands trembling slightly as he attempted to combine the two techniques. His first attempt was clumsy, the sticks colliding awkwardly, but he didn't let it discourage him. He steadied his breathing, concentrating on the feel of the sticks, on the rhythm that was beginning to form in his mind. With each attempt, his movements became a little more cohesive, the flutter and flap blending together into a single fluid sequence. He could feel his muscles responding, adapting to the rhythm, and a sense of accomplishment began to build within him. He stole a quick glance at Andrew, who nodded approvingly, his gaze warm with encouragement. Around him, the other students were also beginning to find their rhythm, some moving with ease, others struggling, but each one focused, committed to the lesson. There was a quiet determination in the room, a sense of shared purpose that filled the air, binding them together in their journey toward mastery. Andrew's voice broke through the silence, calm and steady. "Balance isn't something you find overnight. It's something you build, one step at a time, one movement at a time. In Kalikai, balance is everything. It's the foundation of every technique, every lesson. Without it, there's no strength, no control." Max felt those words resonate within him, echoing through his mind as he continued to practice. Balance had always been a challenge for him, a concept that felt both familiar and elusive. But here, in this quiet, focused space, he could feel it taking shape, like a small flame growing brighter with each flicker of the sticks in his hands. As the lesson continued, Max felt his confidence growing, his movements becoming smoother, more cohesive. He was no longer just imitating Andrew's motions. He was finding his own rhythm, his own balance. The flutter and flap became a dance, a steady flow that felt both powerful and serene. By the end of the session, Max was breathing heavily, a light sheen of sweat on his forehead. His arms ached, his muscles tired, but there was a spark in his eyes, a quiet pride that he hadn't felt in a long time. He glanced around at the other students, seeing the same sense of accomplishment mirrored in their faces, the same quiet joy of discovering something new within themselves. Andrew gathered them in a circle, his expression calm and content. "You all did well today," he said, his voice warm with pride. "Remember, this is only the beginning. Kali Kai is a journey, one that requires patience, resilience, and trust in yourself. The techniques will come with time, but what matters most is that you're willing to try, to find balance even when it feels impossible." Max looked down at the sticks in his hands, feeling the weight, the potential they held. He felt a sense of connection, a quiet understanding that went beyond the movements themselves. For the first time, he felt a glimpse of the strength Andrew had spoken of, a strength that came not from fighting, but from within. As they bowed in respect to conclude the lesson, Max's heart swelled with a newfound sense of purpose, a quiet determination to keep going, to keep building, one movement at a time. Chapter 4: Fearless by Nature, Andrew's Silent Burden. Andrew Sanoda stood alone in the dojo as the evening light faded, casting long shadows that stretched across the polished floor. The students had left hours ago, but he lingered, his gaze drifting across the empty space where, moments before, his students had practiced and stumbled, where they had laughed nervously and whispered their shared frustrations. Now, in the quiet solitude, he could hear only the faint echo of their voices, the ghostly remnants of their efforts lingering in the air. His hands gripped a pair of Kali sticks, the familiar weight a grounding presence in his hands. He twirled them slowly, his movements precise and controlled, each flick of his wrist honed from years of training and repetition. The sound of the sticks cutting through the air was soothing, a rhythmic whisper that steadied his mind and focused his thoughts. He found solace in the movement, in the grace and discipline that Kali Kai demanded. It was the one constant in his life, the one place where he felt completely in control, his body an extension of his will. But tonight, that familiar calm eluded him. He could feel a weight pressing down on him, a heaviness in his chest that he couldn't shake. He moved through the motions with his usual precision, yet there was a hollowness to it, an emptiness that made his movements feel mechanical, almost robotic. He felt disconnected from the very art he had built his life around, as though something essential was missing, something he couldn't quite name. He paused, lowering the sticks, his gaze unfocused as he stared at his reflection in the mirror that lined the far wall. His own eyes looked back at him, dark and unwavering, yet there was a distance there, a kind of isolation that he had learned to live with. For as long as he could remember, he had been different, set apart by a condition that made him unique, but also painfully alone. Andrew couldn't feel fear. He had known it since he was a child. While other children cried and clung to their mothers at the sound of thunder, he had watched the storm in silent fascination, feeling nothing but a distant curiosity. When his friends dared each other to climb the tallest trees, to run across rickety bridges, he had led the way without hesitation, baffled by their trembling limbs and wide, anxious eyes. It was as though he was missing a fundamental piece, an instinct that everyone else seemed to share. Now, as an adult, his condition had become both his strength and his burden. He was respected, even admired, for his calmness under pressure, his unshakable composure. To his students, he was a figure of unwavering strength, a mentor who seemed untouchable, unbreakable. Yet, this very trait that made him a pillar for others had also set him apart, leaving him isolated, unable to connect with the very people he sought to guide. He thought of Max, the newest student, with his guarded expressions and quiet intensity, the way he held himself with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. Andrew had seen the way Max looked at him, the unspoken questions in his eyes, the flicker of awe mixed with confusion. Max was searching for something, for strength, for resilience. for the ability to rise above his pain. And Andrew wanted to help him, wanted to guide him toward a path of inner peace and balance. But there was a distance between them, a gap that Andrew didn't know how to bridge. He closed his eyes, letting the memory of his students' faces wash over him, the hope and fear that mingled in their gazes, the struggles that each of them carried. He could see it in their posture, in the way their bodies tensed, their movements hesitant, uncertain. He could sense their fear, feel its presence like an invisible wall that separated him from them. And he was powerless to understand it, to truly connect with the experience of facing something unknown, something terrifying. A deep sigh escaped him, and he resumed his movements, the sticks gliding in controlled arcs as he moved through a series of complex patterns. His body knew the motions by heart, each twist and flick a testament to years of practice and discipline. Yet, as he moved, he felt an ache in his chest, a longing for something he couldn't name, a desire to feel the pulse of fear, to know what it was like to face his own limitations, his own vulnerability. In a swift motion, he flipped one stick over his head, spinning it in a tight arc before bringing it down in a sharp, controlled stop. His body was a blur of movement, each motion precise, each flutter landing with calculated force. He moved with a grace that was almost hypnotic, his form flawless, his balance unshakable. And yet, there was a hollowness to it, a mechanical perfection that lacked the raw, visceral energy he saw in his students. He remembered watching Max practice earlier that day, the way his hands had trembled as he held the sticks, the hesitation in his movements. There had been a vulnerability there, a fear that made each step uncertain, each motion a struggle. And yet, it was that very fear that had given Max's movements a kind of beauty, a depth that Andrew's own perfection could never achieve. Max had been fighting not just to learn the technique, but to overcome something within himself, to push past his own limitations. Andrew paused, lowering the sticks, his breathing steady but his heart heavy. He stared at his reflection once more, studying the face that looked back at him. To the world, he was fearless, a symbol of strength and resilience. But in that moment, all he could see was a man alone, a man who could never fully connect with the people he cared about, the people he wanted to help. He was on the outside, looking in, forever separated by a wall of invulnerability that he couldn't break. He tightened his grip on the sticks, a surge of frustration welling up within him. It was an odd feeling, one he rarely experienced, but tonight, it felt almost unbearable. He wanted to reach out, to feel what they felt, to understand the fear that drove them, that shaped their lives in ways he could only imagine. He wanted to be more than just a teacher, more than a distant figure of strength. He wanted to be human, to share in their struggles, their doubts, their triumphs. In a swift, fluid motion, he threw one stick into the air, catching it with the opposite hand as he spun, his body a blur of controlled movement. He moved faster, his motions intensifying, each flutter landing with a precision that bordered on aggression. The sticks cut through the air, their rhythmic swish filling the empty room, a haunting echo that seemed to mirror his own inner turmoil. He continued, pushing himself harder, his body a machine of flawless motion, each flick and twist a testament to his mastery. And yet, with every movement, he felt the emptiness growing, the aching void that no amount of skill or discipline could fill. He was trapped in his own perfection, a prisoner of his own fearlessness. As the final stick landed in his hand, he stopped, his chest rising and falling with the exertion. The dojo was silent once more, the echoes of his movements fading into the stillness. He stood there, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his own isolation pressing down on him. In that moment, Andrew felt a flicker of something, an inkling of the fear he had longed to understand. It was a fear not of danger or pain, but of being alone, of never truly connecting with another soul. It was a fear of a life spent on the outside, of a heart untouched by the vulnerability that made life real, that made it beautiful. He took a deep breath, his grip loosening on the sticks, his gaze softening as he looked out at the empty room. He didn't know how to bridge the gap between himself and his students, didn't know how to reach past the wall of fearlessness that separated him from their world. But in that moment, he made a silent promise. To keep trying, to keep reaching out, to find a way to connect, even if it meant facing the loneliness that had always been his silent burden. Andrew set the sticks down, his posture relaxing as he took a final, steadying breath. He looked around the dojo, feeling a quiet determination settle over him, a resolve to be more than just a teacher, to find a way to understand, to empathize, even if he couldn't truly feel fear. As he turned off the lights and locked the door behind him, he stepped out into the cool night, the weight of his isolation still heavy, but his heart just a little bit lighter, buoyed by the hope that one day he might find a way to understand, to feel, and to truly connect. Chapter 5. Battles Outside the Dojo. Schoolyard Struggles. The high-pitched ring of the school bell echoed through the hallways, signaling the end of third period and sending a wave of students into the corridors, a torrent of voices and hurried footsteps filling the air. Max made his way through the crowded hallway, his expression closed and his gaze fixed firmly ahead. He had learned to move with purpose, to avoid eye contact, to keep his posture rigid and defensive, as if he could shield himself from the world around him. His prosthetic leg, though functional, set him apart. The sound of his steps was different, a slightly hollow tap that echoed off the tiled floor, and he could feel the occasional stares, the quick glances that other students thought he wouldn't notice. Some days he was able to tune it out, to let it roll off him like water. But today, the weight of those glances seemed heavier, each one a reminder of what he'd lost, of the life he used to have. Max turned down a quiet hallway, hoping to avoid the usual clusters of students who gathered between classes. He moved carefully, keeping his gait steady, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. His face was a mask of calm, but beneath the surface, his emotions churned, a turbulent mix of frustration, sadness, and a quiet, simmering anger that he tried to keep buried. As he approached his locker, a familiar voice cut through the noise, sharp and mocking. "Hey, Tin Man," a boy called out, his voice dripping with derision. "How's the bionic leg treating you?" Max felt his shoulders tense, a reflexive tightening that he'd grown accustomed to. He kept his eyes on his locker, ignoring the voice, hoping they would lose interest and move on. But they didn't. Instead, he felt a presence looming over him, close enough that he could feel the unwanted warmth of the boy's breath on his neck. He turned slowly, meeting the sneering gaze of Jake Porter, one of the seniors who seemed to take particular pleasure in targeting anyone who didn't fit his narrow view of normal. Jake was flanked by two other boys, both wearing the same smug expressions, their eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and cruelty. Max clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. He had learned long ago that reacting only encouraged them, that showing any sign of weakness would be like blood in the water. But today, his patience was wearing thin. He could feel the anger bubbling up, the frustration that had been building for months, threatening to spill over. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Jake said, reaching out and giving Max a shove. It wasn't hard, but it was enough to make Max stumble, his prosthetic leg catching slightly on the tiled floor. He quickly regained his balance, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "Back off, Jake," Max said, his voice steady but laced with a warning edge. Jake laughed, a low, mocking sound that sent a ripple of laughter through his friends. "What are you gonna do about it, Tin Man? You gonna hobble after me?" Max's fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles white with tension. He wanted to hit back, to lash out, to show them that he wasn't as weak as they thought. But he knew better. He knew that violence would only make things worse, that it would give them more fuel to use against him. As he stood there, fighting the urge to retaliate, he noticed a figure standing a few feet away, watching the scene unfold with a quiet intensity. Stacy Lee, one of his classmates, stood with her arms wrapped around her books, her eyes wide and worried as she looked from Max to Jake and back again. Stacy had her own struggles at school. She was often teased for her Down syndrome, her mannerisms, and the way she moved through life with an openness that made her an easy target. Max could see the concern in her gaze, the way her body tensed as if she wanted to intervene but didn't know how. For a brief moment, their eyes met, a silent exchange that conveyed more than words ever could. They were both outsiders in their own way, both struggling to navigate a world that didn't understand them, that seemed determined to remind them of their differences. Jake noticed Stacy's gaze and turned, his sneer widening as he directed his attention toward her. "Oh, look, it's Max's girlfriend," he taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. "What, you here to save him?" Stacy's cheeks flushed and she looked down, her grip on her books tightening. She didn't say anything, but Max could see the hurt in her eyes, the way her shoulders hunched slightly as if she were trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. Something inside Max snapped. He straightened, his posture shifting from defensive to defiant, his eyes hardening as he looked directly at Jake. "Leave her out of this," he said, his voice cold and unyielding. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by the sudden shift in Max's demeanor. "Or what?" he challenged, stepping closer, his face inches from Max's. "You think you can stop me?" Max didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow, steady breath, his mind flashing back to the lessons he'd learned at the dojo. He thought of the balance and control that Andrew had taught him, the importance of restraint and focus. He wasn't going to fight, but he wasn't going to back down either. With a calm, deliberate motion, he shifted his weight, positioning himself in a way that felt grounded, steady. He raised his hands, not in fists, but open, relaxed, a stance that conveyed both readiness and control. His eyes locked onto Jake's, unwavering, challenging. Jake hesitated, clearly taken aback by the change in Max's posture. For a moment there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a brief hesitation that Max didn't miss. But Jake quickly masked it with a sneer, shoving Max again, harder this time. Max absorbed the impact, his body moving with the force rather than resisting it. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a clarity that sharpened his senses, grounding him in the moment. He didn't react, didn't give Jake the satisfaction of a response. Instead, he held his ground, his expression calm, almost detached. Seeing that his attempts to provoke Max were failing, Jake scowled, muttering a curse under his breath. He took a step back, glancing at his friends who were starting to look uncomfortable. "Whatever, Tin Man," he spat, turning away with a dismissive wave of his hand. "You're not worth my time." As Jake and his friends walked away, Max let out a slow breath, the tension draining from his body. He felt a mix of relief and exhaustion, the adrenaline fading to leave a dull ache in his muscles. He glanced over at Stacy, who was still watching him, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Max nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, I'm okay." Stacy looked down, her fingers fidgeting with the edges of her notebook. I don't get why they have to be so mean," she murmured, her voice tinged with sadness. I just want to be left alone." Max felt a pang of sympathy, a deep understanding of the frustration and isolation that Stacy felt. He knew what it was like to be singled out, to be made to feel like an outsider. And in that moment, he realized that they shared a bond, a quiet resilience that connected them in ways that went beyond words. "You ever thought about learning to defend yourself?" he asked, his voice gentle but earnest. Stacy looked up, her eyes widening slightly. Like what you were doing? Max nodded. Yeah. I mean, I've only just started, but there's this place, a dojo. They teach you how to stay calm, how to handle situations like this without fighting. He paused, glancing at her with a small, encouraging smile. It might help. Stacy considered his words, her gaze thoughtful, her shoulders relaxing slightly. She looked down, a shy smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Maybe I could try it, she said softly, her voice filled with a hint of hope. Max nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of connection that he hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since the accident, he felt like he wasn't alone, like there was someone who understood, who shared in his struggles. As they walked down the hallway together, side by side, Max felt a quiet resolve building within him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for Stacy, for everyone who had ever felt small, who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And in that moment, he knew that he would keep going, keep pushing forward, not just for himself, but for those who needed someone to stand by their side. And as they rounded the corner, heading toward their next class, Max felt a new sense of purpose, a quiet strength that came not from fighting, but from standing strong, from refusing to let others define who he was. It was a strength that came from within, a strength that he was only just beginning to understand. Chapter 6. Laurie's Stand, A Mother's Strength. Laurie Reeves sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Outside, the evening sky was tinged with deep shades of indigo, stars beginning to glimmer against the fading light. She wrapped her hands around a mug of tea, savoring its warmth as she gazed out the window, lost in her thoughts. It was these quiet moments, once Max was in bed and the house had settled into its nighttime stillness, that she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her grief. She could still remember the day her life had changed, the moment everything she knew and loved was ripped from her, leaving a scar that had never truly healed. Her husband, Anton, had been her anchor, her partner in every sense of the word. He had been the steadying force in their lives, the one who could always find a way to make her laugh, even in the most challenging moments. She closed her eyes, a memory of Anton coming to life as if he were there beside her, his easy smile, the warmth of his hand as he held hers, their laughter mingling in the air. But now, there was only silence, only the empty echo of a love that had once filled every corner of her world. She opened her eyes, blinking against the sudden sting of tears. She couldn't let herself fall apart. Not now. Not when Max needed her more than ever. He was all she had left, the one piece of Anton that remained, a spark of his spirit living on in their son. Max had Anton's determination, his stubborn resilience, his quiet strength. But he had also inherited the weight of their family's pain, a burden that Laurie wished she could lift from his shoulders. Laurie took a slow, steadying breath, her gaze drifting to a framed photograph that sat on the counter. It was a picture of the three of them, taken on a warm summer day at the park. Max was grinning, his arms wrapped around Laurie and Anton, his face alight with the unbridled joy of a boy who had the world at his feet. Laurie reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame, the cool glass a stark contrast to the warmth of that memory. Since the accident, Laurie had done everything she could to keep Max going, to help him find a way to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. But she knew it wasn't enough. She could see the pain in his eyes, the frustration he tried so hard to hide. She could feel the anger that simmered just below the surface, the resentment that came from a life cut short before it had even truly begun. There were days when Max would withdraw, closing himself off, his expressions tight, his words few. It was during those moments that Laurie's heart ached the most, the helplessness almost unbearable. She wanted to reach out, to hold him, to tell him that everything would be okay. But she knew that words could only go so far. He needed more than comfort. He needed hope, a reason to believe that he could still find a place for himself in a world that had been so cruelly altered. Lori set her mug down, pressing her hands together, her fingers laced tightly as though holding on would keep her from unraveling. She knew she had to be strong, not just for Max, but for herself. She had lost Anton, and that pain would always be a part of her, a scar that would never fully heal. But she couldn't let it define her, couldn't let it consume her. Max deserved more than that. He deserved a mother who was whole, who could guide him through his own struggles, who could be his foundation when everything else seemed uncertain. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate as she walked to the window, her gaze drifting to the faint glow of the city lights in the distance. Somewhere out there, Max was trying to find his way, navigating a world that didn't understand him, that looked at him with pity or indifference. And Lori knew that she couldn't protect him from that, couldn't shield him from the pain and the prejudice. But she could be there for him, could stand by his side, could remind him that he was not alone. The memory of their last conversation lingered in her mind, a moment of quiet vulnerability that she cherished. Max had opened up to her, shared his fears and frustrations, his anger and sadness. And she had listened, had held him, had let him know that his pain was valid, that he didn't have to hide it. She had seen a glimpse of the boy he used to be, the boy who had once believed he could conquer the world. And in that moment, she had vowed to help him find that spark again, to remind him of the strength that still lay within him. Lori's thoughts drifted back to the first day she had taken Max to the dojo, the quiet hope that had filled her heart as she watched him step through those doors. She had seen something in Andrew, a calm resilience that reminded her of Anton, a strength that came not from bravado, but from a deep, inner peace. And she had hoped that Max would find something there, a spark that would help him see beyond his limitations, beyond the pain that threatened to consume him. Her gaze shifted back to the photograph on the counter, her eyes lingering on Max's smiling face, the light in his eyes that had once shone so brightly. She could still see it, flickering beneath the surface, a glimmer of hope that he tried so hard to hide. And she knew, with every fiber of her being, that she would do whatever it took to help him find that light again. She would stand by him, fight for him, guide him, even if it meant facing her own fears, her own doubts. With a quiet resolve, Lori reached for the picture, holding it close as she whispered a silent promise, to Anton, to herself, and to Max. She would not let his spirit fade. She would not let their family's strength be lost. She would be the foundation he needed, the pillar that would hold him steady as he navigated the turbulent waters of his own journey. As she placed the photograph back on the counter, Lori felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet strength that settled over her like a comforting embrace. She might not have all the answers, might not know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would be there for Max, every step of the way, no matter how difficult the road ahead. And as the night deepened and the world around her fell into silence, Lori stood at the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon, a mother's strength unwavering, a mother's love eternal.